I'm here with Kelly Hrudey. No introduction needed. Everybody knows him. Household name in this country for sure. Kelly, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for the invite, Faisal. It's you and I, as you know, just to share with our viewers, though, you and I have been chatting about doing this for, I don't know, 6 weeks or something, and I kept putting it off. It wasn't you, it was me, but I was so uncertain about what might happen in the upcoming weeks, and I'm still uncertain. But I think we can have a chat that with a little bit more certainty, I think.
And it was well positioned that you talked to me about this and said, let's hold off. Let's get some more information. We're getting more and more information from the NHL. A lot of businesses in this city and across the hockey world are dependent on this reopening and how it works and how they can derive from it. So a lot of entrepreneurs and business owners are really interested in this conversation we're having, not just as a fan, but as a business owner. So I'm really happy that you can join us today. The team is still working on some technical pieces here. They're going to let me know when we're ready, can get into the mix of it. But we were talking before we got on live about how you can remember games in the past. And there's certain things that just, you can watch something or it triggers that memory. And I think it's a gift of being a professional athlete. Kind of just how do you guys do it? What's the secret?
I don't know. It's always been my nature. And that was playing minor hockey as well growing up. I remember people's names and scores and, kind of, I was telling you off air that I might not be able to remember the exact score for every game, but I'll remember periods of maybe that stretch we're in, whether we're playing well, whether we're struggling a little bit. I'll kind of remember about what I was thinking personally. Plenty of games I'll remember a lot of. But, it's just interesting. So I was watching one of these replay games not long ago. And I remember this one save. I made a deflection save off of Murray Craven. It was game 5, 93, the second round playoffs. The game was it was already into second overtime. I made what was, I thought, one of my best saves of my life. It was a subtle little deflection by Murray Craven. I had read the play well. I moved out and I made the save with my shoulder, held on to the puck, and I was hoping to see that save in the replay, and they edited it out. The one save that I was so looking forward to watching in the entire broadcast, and some editor took it out, and I'm thinking, not that one. And then we were lucky because minutes later, Gary Shuchuk scored perhaps the biggest goal of his career and life when he scored the overtime winner. And then we went back home and knocked off Vancouver, although Kirk McLean was ridiculous. I think we had almost 50 shots in that game 6, but we were able to get past Vancouver.
Look at that. That's crazy. Let's go start off now. Kelly Hrudey is here. Thank you so much for joining me. You've gone through a whole big change with this pandemic. The NHL has gone through a whole big change. Let's set the tone first. What has the NHL actually decided so far when it comes to bringing hockey back?
Well, they're going in 4 phases, and we've now just a couple days ago gone into it. By the way, because people might watch this weeks down the road, this is the first week of June. So it was this week that they announced phase 2, which is an important phase. Now they're going to allow players back into their training facilities in small groups, mind you, groups of 6 or less with a limited amount of training staff to help them do their things. And so that's a great second stage. I think, Faisal, it's important that everybody knows that the health and safety of the players, the staff, the crews around, the TV crews and arena workers, everybody that's number one. So it's great to relaunch, but I think we have to be aware that as excited as I am, like I'm really excited, I have in the back of my brain that, my fingers are crossed because this means so much to so many people, not just the people involved directly with the game of the NHL, but there are so many other businesses that are tied to it, and I'm sure their fingers are crossed as well.
And so the setup right now with phase 2 is allowing players to train and practice together.
In small groups. Now, having said that, I just found out today some teams are moving ahead. That's June 8th. That can start to take place, which I believe is Monday. And some teams are looking at that date as a startup, if you will. And I understand there are some teams that aren't quite prepared, and they're going to hold off a little bit because phase 3 will be when they're going to announce when training camp will be. Now, that's a moving target. So I think, say a month ago, people thought or were hopeful somewhere around the beginning of July. Recently, I think it was like the 20th of July. Now I'm hearing some whispers. I don't know if it's true, but it could be as late as maybe August 1st. So what's really important, and I want to say this, though, Faisal, with this whole back to play, it's important that if you want some background, go watch Commissioner Gary Bettman's press conference from about 10 days ago. And furthermore, if you go back 2 months, I guess, Ron McLean has that show, In Conversation, it's called. And the commissioner was on that show. And it really gave me reason for optimism. The commissioner was outstanding. He looked excited about an opportunity to end the so-called pause. But what gives me optimism and strength and so on is that whenever there's an obstacle, and there were many and there still will be many, the commissioner and his staff they've always found ways to get around those obstacles. And they've never, not even early, they didn't put up their hands and go, hey, this is too daunting, it's going to be way too difficult, there's too many things in our way, and let's just look to starting the next season. They've always had in mind that they wanted to hand out the Stanley Cup this year, and they are finding solutions to all these difficult issues.
And so the rough idea of when we're going to see these players back on the ice going for the Stanley Cup, are we saying it's going to be in the fall?
In all likelihood, that's kind of what I'm hearing, although it's very fluid, right? It could be changing at any given time. Of course, there can't be a second wave of the pandemic, or else, it seems as though it would be very difficult then to hand out a Stanley Cup this year. But so they have so many different things. They're still working. I think you might be aware, in the viewers, that they've chosen, or they're going to choose, 2 hubs. And I was told by somebody recently that and just, by the way, just that I'm saying it doesn't necessarily mean that it's factual. It's just what I hear from talking to people. I heard that they're hoping to have 1 hub in the United States and 1 in Canada. Now, a lot of things are going to have to happen for that to work, including the participation by both governments. But it seems as though in an ideal world, that's what they'd like.
And that's why you're hearing the push for Edmonton and the provincial government stepping in and saying, we would love to have Edmonton to be a hub here for hockey. 2 was surprising to me, considering with all the traveling requirements and so many players are living abroad, that I would have thought they would have gone east, west, and north and south. So maybe having 4 hubs in that way. But I'm sure they've thought all about that, and they've come to a conclusion that keeping at some sort of hub would be the ideal situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the last number I heard, that they had 10 cities from the NHL as those hubs. And now I think that they've freely admitted that what might look okay today might not look very good in 2 weeks or something. So they're, once again, always based on the health and safety of everybody involved, and depending on if there's more outbreaks in the particular cities and hubs. And so that would be, I don't think, if my memory serves me well from watching the Gary Bettman presser 10 days ago, he said that those hubs are not going to be announced until pretty much near the end, or when they announce the hub cities.
And so based on that, and we've got a question coming out of Facebook asking, how does that impact next season? Are we going to be pushing this off to the new year possibly?
Yes, indeed. And that's the other thing. That's why I suggest to people, if you really want some great information, go back and view Gary Bettman and watch his pressers in the interview, because he really gets into detail about what might happen. And there is no firm plan for next year as in terms of, let's just say, ideally, they get to relaunch the NHL in August. or no, September or October. Excuse me, not August. In September, October. Then it takes ballpark 2 months. The commissioner has not said that it has to start by, say, December 15th again for the following season. They're more flexible than I think you would believe they might be, because of going into the next year. They are more than comfortable giving out a Stanley Cup in the following year in July, maybe even August. So, these 2 years are really going to be a test for everybody. But there's no date set in stone, and it's going to be very fluid.
Let's talk about the format for the playoffs and what the NHL has decided or has at least brought to the table at this point in time. Give us a breakdown of what the format will be.
Well, this is pretty exciting. I'm glad that they're not playing any more regular season games. I like the 24-team format. I think that's, in terms of fair, I think that's, I could definitely live with 24 teams. There might be a couple of teams that you would think, well, I don't know if they really did have a chance to get into the playoff picture, but nonetheless, not everybody's going to agree with everything. So the four conference leaders, East and West, they're going to play some games as well, a round robin, and then they'll be reseeded. And then there's remaining 16 teams, and they're going to play in a qualifying round. And that's going to be a best of 5. I think most people we're looking or hoping for a best of 7. I'm very flexible in this, Faisal. And now I'm going to give you a little bit of history of the National Hockey League. So when I was playing early on in my days, so from 1980 to 86, I believe, the series, every first round was a best of 5. And from 75 to 1979, so for 5 years, the first round was only a best of 3. And then in 87, it moved to a best of 7. So when people make the argument to me that this year's going to lack integrity, I don't buy it, because we've seen different formats. We've had a series, like I said, a best 2 out of 3, which is hard to imagine. And hard to imagine that teams like, I think Toronto and LA played one time in a series. I think Rangers in Los Angeles. So can you imagine a best of 3 and having that kind of distance to travel in the first round? So my point about this whole thing, and then after the first round, in this year, best of 5. Then it goes back to the 4 remaining rounds, all best of 7. So I think that should appease everybody. Now, again, not everybody's going to be happy with all these different situations, but I'm trying to remain flexible and just find a way to make it work and be happy with everything.
Absolutely. What about the teams that are no longer playing now? They're done until the next season. What happens to them financially? Because they lost some money because of ticket sales. And that kind of can take a hit, especially those teams that are financially impaired comparisons to others, and they're at the bottom 6. What happens to those?
Well, again, if you were to listen to not that I'm involved, it's way above me, but if you listen to the commissioner, he's talked about that at this point, he believes every team is financially strong enough to endure what we're going through right now. I don't think that any of those teams would be happy, considering financially how they're going to be damaged. But nonetheless, I will have to say this. In my time in the NHL, and I was drafted in 1980, so I've been a part of the NHL in one way or the other since 1980. I don't believe that the league has been stronger. And you look at when the commissioner took over the NHL, I believe revenues were something like $300 million a year, and I think they're around $5 billion a year now. So it's a far different league, the NHL, from what it was plenty of years ago.
Absolutely. When you look at the format and you look at these hubs, how does revenue come into these franchises now? Because I think and correct me if I'm wrong, but the playoffs was what the owners loved because of the revenue off the ticket sales, because the players were already paid. And now
that's right.
No playoff revenue for them. What kind of format do you think would work so that they can get some revenue from this?
Well, first of all, you're right. And I think it's important that people know that the players, for the most part, they've all been paid. So players don't get paid a salary during the playoffs. You get bonus money depending on how far you go in the playoffs. And so that's a time for the owners to really make some money, and serious money, depending on which team, which franchise. A gate in a particular night is a really good night. So, but they have their own internal accounting and how they share revenues. The farther you go and so on, and TV is a big part of it. How they can make up some of that revenue with nobody in the seats during this playoff that we have coming up. That's going to be awfully difficult, but I think they're just trying to find a way economically to make it work to a certain degree, but nobody's ever going to be whole.
So the only live sport I've seen so far during this pandemic has been the Ultimate Fighting Championship, or UFC, and they're still doing pay-per-view. Do you think pay-per-view would be a good idea for the NHL to explore?
Well, I'm smiling because I work for a Rogers Sportsnet, so I don't think that's going to work. So I'm not sure exactly the route. I think we should mention there's a soccer league in Germany, and I'm not going to pronounce it properly. Bundesliga, I believe.
The Bundesliga, yeah.
And so, yeah, so they're up and running. I've only tried to watch just a few minutes because I hate to admit I'm not the biggest soccer fan, but I wanted to get the experience because I was told that they're sort of just piping in fan noise, and I wanted to view that experience. And I know some people are okay with it. Some people think it's kind of odd. I don't really have an opinion, but yeah. So I'm pretty sure I'm not going to agree with the pay-per-view model because that just doesn't seem to work.
Yeah, because they've already got contracts with broadcasters.
Yes,
they've already got them. They've got a commitment that they have to fulfill. So the UFC doesn't have that when it comes to their main events, because that's their only driver for individuals is a pay-per-view. For when it comes to the NHL or other team sports that are professional, they've got broadcasting rights. So it's going to be a very challenging piece, and some broadcasters are showing all the games or most of the games, and some are not as open. So it's going to be interesting to see from a broadcasting perspective how they're going to reach that game to their fans.
It certainly will, and I can tell you that we have weekly conference calls with Sportsnet, and it's changing all the time. So how it looks to the viewer at home, I have no idea at this point how we're going to do shows. Will there be broadcasters in the buildings? You've got to have production people on site so that you can actually shoot the game with a camera. You have all these different things elements that it's going to be an entirely different world for the viewer, and it's going to be an entirely different world for we, the broadcasters. And who knows? It might not be just these Stanley Cup playoffs. It might be a year down the road or more that it's going to look a lot different. We don't know.
And that's a good point. This could be longer than just one season. This could go into another season or two, and how that experience will be. Yes,
I must say though, for other events like the Olympics, in certain times, we as broadcasters, we have called games off a monitor, so we don't have to physically be in a building to call a game. Now, it's certainly ideal to be in that situation, but under these circumstances, everybody has to adjust. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it's going to look very much like an Olympic game. So when I've worked Olympics, we usually broadcast 3 games a day, whether it's 11 in the morning, 3 in the afternoon, and 8 at night or something like that, whatever the times. But you don't just play 1 game or 2 games. It's multiple games in those 2 hubs for a number of days. And it's frantic and it's hard work. I mean, I've never worked harder in my life than working Olympic Games, because it seems as though sleep is the last thing that you're able to get. But nonetheless, it is exhilarating to work that hard and see the work at the end.
I'm interested to see that there's so many businesses that thrive off of the NHL. And you and I are in Calgary, Alberta. We know when there's a game at the Saddledome, there's so many different restaurants, pubs, other businesses that just do very well or make a lot of their revenue based on this sport. And to see it completely change, it's going to be interesting. I think from my view at least, as an entrepreneur and a business owner, they have to be more creative, innovative, and how to attract business during this time, because you just can't have the walk-up crowd going down the Red Mile,
Yeah.
or the walk-up crowd going towards the Stampede grounds to watch a Flames game. It's going to be completely different, and this is different in Calgary. There are many other cities that have built an entire, let's call it, entertainment district around the hub
Yes.
of the arena, and how that's going to be a bit of an impact. That's going to be interesting to see.
Absolutely, you're so right, and that, from what I gather, will be the plan here in Calgary when we get our new facility, and I'm so looking forward to it because, as you mentioned, there are entertainment districts, and I just love going to cities like that already have that in place. But when I think of those entertainment districts, as you said, you can't have big groups, and you're going to have to be physical distancing. And how does that look, or how does that feel? Do you feel the same excitement when you're in that facility? You look at when the Raptors did so well and won the championship, and everybody was in Jurassic Park, and they're everybody's crammed in like this, and they're watching the Raptors every night, and that's not going to happen anymore. And I don't know about you, Faisal, if you and your family have gone out for dinner yet, but Don and I went out for the first time last night, and it was just a different experience. I think there were only like 3 other tables occupied. And it was nice to get out, and we're allowed to get out now, but it just seemed different. And so my point, when you think about relaunching this NHL, and people, all those other businesses that you mentioned, the pubs and restaurants and so on, they're jam-packed with the fans watching their favorite team. Well, that's not going to be the case. So those revenues won't be there for those industries as well, and that's going to be another hardship that they're going to have to deal with.
The reason why I wanted you on this show was to talk a bit of hockey. I'm a hockey fan. I'm wearing my jersey and excited to get to see this come back. The other part of it is that it's not like there is a ongoing update of what the plans are and what they're thinking. So business owners who've had some sort of dependency of revenue will probably have to play it as a last-minute decision, an audible. Right, and so this is why I wanted to have you on the show, to give these business owners enough lead time so that they can think about what are the different options that are out there, because nothing's set in stone when it comes to timing especially. All we know is the format of how the playoffs are going to be, and as this starting point changes based upon the pandemic, the health of the players, and so forth,
yes,
they need to be nimble enough and have their ideas ready to go in the event something does get called, and they can make that audible right away.
You're so right. They're gonna have to have many different plans in front of them for what it's going to look like, because there's no certainty in the upcoming weeks. There's hopefulness, but right now, you've got to have a bunch of different game plans in front of you, and make sure your staff know, because I wouldn't want to be banking on the NHL starting on October 1st. Fingers crossed again. I've been using that quite a few times today, but everything right now, they better be nimble enough.
There's been such a lag in time between when the NHL stopped playing to at what point when they start again. Do you think the quality of hockey will diminish because of that?
Well, I only hesitate because I've been a part of something somewhat similar. Not entirely, because when I go back to the first ever lockout in '94, we did have a training camp in the regular time in September. We were locked out in September. And then Wayne Gretzky was kind enough to take a bunch of us on a Wayne Gretzky and Friends tour to Europe. And that was in December. So from October, November, maybe early December, that's when we started to skate there. So it was a full 2 months. And we had a 3-day training camp in Detroit, which is more like a social gathering, because it wasn't much of a training camp before we headed overseas. And I can tell you, it wasn't maybe the best quality hockey for 20, 40 minutes, but I was surprised by how well we played and at what level we played, considering the layoff. And then when we came back from that just before the holiday season, then we had ballpark another month until the lockout was resolved. And then, if I'm not mistaken, Faisal, we only had like 4 or 5 days of practice before the real regular season was going to start, another 48-game regular season. And I recall our coach, Barry Melrose, having a pretty stern conversation with us saying, listen, I'd like to be a little bit more flexible or forgiving and tell you guys that, hey, we'll just sort of work our way up to the level that we should be at, but I can't. We only have 48 games. So that same message will be told to these guys that, hey, listen, it'd be great, but we're jumping into the playoffs. You don't have time to sort of ease into it. You've got to get up to your level physically and mentally within a period or two. Like, we can't give away a game or two. So I think because of that sort of like a fear factor, the realization that this is serious. Like, we're fighting for our playoff lives here. I think the hockey's going to be at a pretty good level pretty quickly.
I was thinking while you were saying that there's one other factor that's happening in this time than when you went through the lockout, is that there's a health restriction. Players can't all get together and hit the gym. They can't work out together. They can't rent ice and a whole bunch of things that they could do. And so now we've got that as a roadblock. So I'm interested to see which players are going to be able to stay in shape and maintain that high level of performance versus the ones who may not be able to.
So it's a little different. And yeah, you're right. So I'm going to sort of turn it around though. So when we were locked out in '94, we did rent ice fairly often at the beginning. And then we lost hope. So we forget about that. Then we weren't skating anymore. I was working out sporadically, and then all of a sudden Wayne gives me a call, like I said, in maybe late November, and said, hey, listen, I'm thinking about bringing some guys to Europe. Would you be interested? And all of a sudden I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I haven't skated in I don't know how long. I haven't worked out like I should. And these guys, it's actually the opposite. So when the league was put on pause, they couldn't do anything. They couldn't skate. There's no place to work out in a gym. But now they can start to go back on June 8th. They can start Monday. They can start to have some ice sessions. They can start going back into the gym under the supervision of some sort of training staff. And so they're going to have more of a lead up actually to getting back than we had a chance. So I think to a certain degree, it'll feel unique to them. It'll feel completely different because they're not going to be able to practice as a team until July or August. But they're going to have a bit of a head start.
One of the additional ways of revenue that teams can make is through their merchandise and the sales of merchandise at the location and during that time of playoff. Yep. Do you think there's going to be a big drop in that? Because I can look at cities like Toronto, Montreal, Boston, New York, here in Calgary. People are just crazy about buying jerseys of their home team and other merchandise. I don't know if it's going to change as much, but I'd love to get your intake on, do you think it's going to have an impact that's going to be severe? Because I think there's going to be a drop, but not as big. But I would love your feedback on merchandise sales.
I hope I'm wrong, but I think there'll be a dramatic drop in sales simply because I think with this pandemic, so many people are hurting financially and mentally and worried about where their finances are currently and what they might look like down the road. And I think things like sports merchandise and things that give us comfort when we're feeling okay about our job security and so on, those sorts of things I think will be greatly affected because, man alive, I'm hearing so many stories about people, and you of all people in the financial industry must have so many people with great concerns and not spending on things like sports or sports memorabilia, jerseys, things like that, because their homes are being lost. They're under such mental duress. And by the way, that's why I'm wearing this shirt. It's been a shirt that I've been wearing often when I do interviews during the pandemic, because I think our family, we talk a lot about mental health issues. And, there are a lot of people out there that are really suffering and hurting financially. I know that even our family, we've had some family members either laid off and or had to take pay cuts. And that's dramatically affected how they're living day-to-day life.
Well said, Kelly. I think that kind of should be a clue to business owners. Like if there's the playoffs, and I'm thinking, let's hear home in Calgary, the Flames are I think they're playing against Winnipeg in the first round, if I remember correctly.
Yep.
What a great idea for some of these curbside pickups, delivery of food, alcohol delivery, those types of flavors that can kind of still bring us back to the old school way that we used to watch a game in a bar or a pub, and to add some merch to it, right? Get that feeling back again. So business owners, there are ways you can connect and kind of group sell, not just your own product or your own service, but by adding on some hockey flavor to it. Some of the major beer brands around the world have done that very well, and they've added jerseys and so forth into their 12 packs and so forth. Why not do that with your businesses? So that's why I wanted to address that question.
And I think also you bring up a good point, and one that I just thought of now. Here in Alberta, Dr. Hinshaw, by the way, I think she's just done a wonderful job through the entire pandemic. We're lucky to have her, but what she's saying now is that easing some of these restrictions, and this warms my heart because now we're actually having a chance to visit with our family now again, because throughout most of the pandemic, we were diligent. We even though we wanted to see our children and our grandson desperately, we really stayed strong and made sure we did the right thing so we could flatten the curve. But now here in Alberta, you can, I think she said the bubble, you can sort of have your own little bubble with your family, and it's not going to be a big bubble, but you can have some groups now in your house. Granted, everybody has to be symptom free and so on, but then you could, if you're able to, order in dinner, maybe you can watch the games with your family and so on. So maybe in that way we can get our family time and support some of the local restaurants and pubs and so on that desperately need our help.
I was thinking about how we go into the Saddle Dome and to the Stampede grounds, and we have a big parking lot, and you've got the Saddle Dome there. We used to put up screens and so forth so people can walk on.
Yeah.
And we can't do that in large numbers, and I was trying to think of that and the drive-in theater and kind of merge the two and see if maybe these NHL franchises will be able to have a drive-in while watching your game in your car while you've got some opportunities. There's so many different things that these franchise and business owners outside of these franchises can do that can still bring that fever of the playoffs back in.
And I'm wondering, it's a good point about the drive-in theaters. How about a regular movie theater? If you had people social distancing, could they do sort of viewing parties there and maybe throw on the big screen a TV game or a hockey game instead of a movie? Concessions would make some money that way. I don't know if it'd just be better to play a regular movie and have social distancing. I don't know, but it's an idea anyways. And there are so many creative people out there that they're going to think about all these different avenues to help their businesses out, and maybe ideas that we've never even considered in the past, but now might be an option.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm also interested in how the franchises connect with their season ticket holders in this. Being a season ticket holder here, I know that there's been a lot of emails, phone calls coming my way, having that connection. They're allowing us to see these players on a video conference call, have that kind of experience, that connection. I wonder what happens to the playoffs. How do they keep integrating those season ticket holders, because that's a big chunk of revenue, and their corporate box owners? How do they keep that engagement with those? Because there could be a fade out. People could be saying, okay, if I'm not coming back into the arena in another 2 years potentially, why would I commit now for something 2 years down the road?
Yeah, well, that's individual choice. People are going to have to decide whether or not that how they're doing financially, whether they're still interested in being supportive of the franchise and so on. It's interesting. I hope your experience with the Flames has been great. I know mine was when I used to be a season seat holder. I think I was a seat holder for, I don't know, something like close to 15 years. And then when I became super busy, when Rogers Sportsnet got the last TV contract, and my life became nothing but hockey night and Flames broadcast, then I had to give up my seats because, I wasn't going to games like I used to. But so what's your overall reaction as a season seat holder? Has the experience been a healthy one?
It's been a healthy one. It took them a while to get things going and communicating where I would be engaged. So I appreciate the fact that they've moved along that way. I have to admit I'm not a diehard Flames fan. I'm a hockey fan, and that's why I have the season seats. And so for me, I love the game more than I love the team. And I just want to see a good game on the ice. And so for me, to be more engaged with the sport, with the players, not just one team. I can watch any game as long as it's a good game on the ice. I'm happy to watch it.
I'm with you. Listen, I'm on the road a ton during a regular season, and oftentimes on Friday when I get to Toronto, and even though I'm going to be working hard on Saturday, and I sometimes should most likely just go out for a nice quiet dinner, I will go to one of my favorite restaurants, and I'll have my iPad and my cell phone, and I'll be eating my dinner, and I have two different hockey games on, and I'm having a great time, right? People would say, why don't you relax and just enjoy your dinner? And I do that once in a while as well, but I really enjoy the opportunity to watch hockey. And I'm like you, although I cover the Flames, I'm looking for a great game, and it doesn't matter if it's Dallas and Nashville or whomever. I just turn on those games and I settle in for a good night.
One thing that fans have been talking about, and we have this question on Instagram right now, is about how the body contact being close between players and especially fighting, how that's going to be. And I haven't really heard anything mentioned about that. So maybe if you have some insight or thoughts about that, that'd be great to hear.
All right. So moving forward, let's just say we're super excited, and there's playoff hockey in September, October, November. It's going to look and feel entirely different. So for all of us hockey fans, we're going to have to get used to some of the contact not existing. What I mean, things like a face wash, the whistle blows, there's a scrum, and the guy puts his glove in the other guy's face and rubs it around. And in my opinion, I think that will be a penalty now. A certain penalty. It's an automatic penalty. I don't think we'll see fighting. We may see like first responders or frontline workers. I mean, the face shield in front of a guy's helmet. I don't know. It could look. We just have to be prepared for something that we've never witnessed before. And there'll be other things also that I'm just thinking off the top of my head. Would it be a warning for the first time if you spit on the bench or on the ice? Like, you won't be able to spit anymore, and players are notorious for that, right? How will they make sure that a player uses his own towel, his own water bottle, all these things where there could be exposure? Now, I'm thinking back in my days, I was always kind of like a germaphobe, but I always thought towels were okay. And so, as a goalie, I don't get a chance to go to the bench very often, only a TV timeout and or a regular timeout. And I still would take a towel and wipe my face, but it's a wet towel. Somebody's already used that. So that can't happen anymore. So things that, I'm sure health workers are already working with the league. Like, here's what has to happen. Here's how it'll look. I'm sure the players are going to be annoyed with some of the changes, but it's just for the good of society. And we have to make sure, as we talked at the opening of the show, the health and safety of the players. And I bet there's 10 other things that I haven't even thought of yet that might be implemented and or being considered.
I'm just thinking about when things changed in the 80s when helmets were mandated. And I can keep on thinking of the Oilers' poor Craig McTavish when he was not wearing a helmet, how he had to put one on. That was a big change. And that was also a change for the experience of the fan. because they were accustomed to
Yeah.
seeing the full head of the individual, and now they're trying to figure out who's that player. If it's not for the jersey, they may not know who that player is.
Yeah, it's going to be different for all those reasons. I'm thinking, here's a personal thing, and I hope I don't gross people out, but I wasn't a spitter, and that grossed me out. But oftentimes, for most athletes, you get a runny nose, right? And so on a bench, you're not going to have Kleenex. I mean, that's ridiculous. So you find a way to sort of blow your nose on the ice or whatever, which I know grosses most people out, but it's just a fact of that. Now, will that be a penalty? Because you can't have that on the ice, players falling down and sliding across that. I don't know how long a virus can last on a frozen ice surface. That's not my role, but so there are all these little things that I'm just starting to think about. And now I will tell you this, Faisal, tonight we're barbecuing kubasa, and I'm going to have a nice cold beer with it, and I'm going to start to think about some of the things and maybe jot them down. What are some of the other things? I mean, we're kind of laughing about it, but they're serious issues.
And when you add on the excitement of the playoffs, and Temez from Facebook, he's put a question about, how did it feel for you in that tough 4 overtime game that you had against the Capitals?
Yeah.
Could you imagine if you go into 4 or 5 overtimes in the playoffs in COVID? Like, that's a big change there too.
That, and also for the timing of the game then. So that game that we're talking about started at 7:30 at night, and it ended at 4 minutes to 2. So go back 10 or 15 minutes when we're talking about the scheduling of the games, whether it's 10 or 11 in the morning, 3 in the afternoon. What happens if that game in 3 in the afternoon goes 4 overtimes? Because you can't jeopardize, you can't have a shootout in the playoffs. That game has to run its distance. So what happens if you had the late game scheduled at 8, but the middle game doesn't end till 10:30? Then you have to clear out the building, you have to sterilize the building, then you have to have the new teams come in, the dressing rooms have to be sterilized, all that. That late game that was supposed to start at 8, do you start it at midnight? I don't know. Yeah. You might have to. I mean, it sounds goofy, but how else do you do it if you have all these games stacked up on consecutive days? And I'm sure that's an issue that the NHL and the PA are working on right now, trying to find a solution to that, because that's a very real scenario, a very real question issue. This isn't, what's the worst case scenario? Well, this has happened. Games have gone to 3, 4, 5 overtimes, and it is a consideration to be aware of.
And they have to think about not just the player safety, the location, what the government regulations are. They also have to think about the client or the customer, the viewer's experience, because they still want to keep that person engaged. And so they're not going to have a shootout, and that's one thing that's on the table. And if it does go too late and does go to midnight, and you're playing in the U.S. and it's probably in the eastern side of U.S. versus, let's say, Edmonton, if we got it here in Alberta, that would be an impact for the viewer to watch that game, no matter what time zone you're in. So it's going to be a big challenge to figure out how an overtime and multiple overtimes and in the playoffs during COVID is going to be. Okay, so I do have a little situation that I went through also as a player back in 83, 84. So the 84 playoffs, our first round opponent, I was playing for the Islanders. Our first round opponent were the New York Rangers. There's a home game for New York in Madison Square Gardens. And what's really popular that time of year, the circus comes to town. Yeah. And so the circus was in the afternoon in MSG. And our game was supposed to start, I believe, at 7:30. Well, because of the circus, they had some issues in, putting up the boards and getting the ice ready and everything. So our game that was supposed to start around 7 didn't start, I believe, until 9:30 or 10. So we had to adjust to that. The fans had to adjust to that they're,
they're walking to MSG from their neighborhood in New York City with a ticket that says 7 o'clock, and they can't get in the building because the game's not going to start till something like 10 o'clock. So that was unique. And I think that moving forward, we'll find different situations like that. So your favorite team, you might be sitting in your living room thinking, hey, my Boston Bruins are playing tonight at 8 o'clock, but because the game went to overtime, game's not going to start till 11 or 12. And so that's going to be an issue for the viewers back home as well.
And the PVR, in case you have to go to bed for it too.
There you go. That's a good point. I didn't consider that. Most games might get the PVR.
Yeah. So when you've got, we got a question from Shane on Instagram, and he's talking about maybe managing fans into the building. We're allowed in restaurants and other locations 50% capacity, up to a maximum of 50 people. Do you think they would have any chance? Let's say the governments and the health services say we can go up to 250. Is it even worth having 250 fans come into a building to watch a game?
I believe so, and I think that they would be. I think they would be interested in that. You could easily, if that's the low number, you could easily social and physical distance in that. But then you'd have to look at other things like when can you go to the washroom? Do you have to go at a certain time based on your section that you're sitting in, and so on? So you don't get long lines there, and how many people can go stand in a line at a concession? It's I believe the NHL and all the other leagues at some point want to get it somewhat back to normal with people in the stands, but how and when, we have no idea.
And so we have a question coming from Facebook. With all this that's going on, why not just cancel the league and come back next season?
A number of reasons why. First of all, I think it's important, to me anyways, not everybody will agree. If possible, it's important to hand out a Stanley Cup and conclude this season. The players want to play. The players are conditioned to play. That's how they think. They want to play the rest of the season. They want the competition to hand out a Stanley Cup. I think it's good for people at home that we talked about the stress people are under, and sports and other forms of entertainment can relieve that stress at times. I think it's very important that we have an outlet. I feel good when I get out of my house and go for my walk or watch something on TV that brings me relief from my daily thinking and my brain. I think, and it's not first and foremost, but revenues are important, because if they do relaunch and have a chance to play the playoffs and hand out a Stanley Cup, there still will be significant money earned. And so I think all those reasons, plus probably more that off the top of my head I'm not even thinking about, that there are enough reasons for me to start it back up again.
And when it comes to the experience of the fan, do you think the broadcasting will be different? Do you think they'll cancel any kind of broadcasting? Because there is Rogers, there's on TV, radio, they've got satellite radio, internet connecting through to giving you a broadcast. Do you think they would change any of that?
Well, I don't think they would lessen the amount of coverage, that's for sure. I think if anything, they'll find this as an opportunity to showcase their quality, their content, their game on the ice, and they'll need different ways to find a way to get that content to the player, to the fans. How it looks again in a broadcast world, it's going to be entirely different, and that's something that still needs to be worked on. But I'm just a big believer in all of us, including in difficult times like this, need some sort of release from life, and that we need some way to gain some sort of normalcy, and entertainment does that for me. Absolutely.
Okay, I need to come clean with you on Instagram, and they come from all the woodworks. Leaf fans are always coming out, and they always want to know what's Kelly Hrudey's pick, what's the playoffs are going to be, who's going to hoist that cup, Kelly?
All right, let me. I did take a couple of notes here, and just bear with me. I have to fire up my iPad again because I'm going to give you what I kind of think. Well, I'm going to say I really like Boston because of the way that they play. Tampa was on a great roll, but I'm not. I could be wrong in all these, by the way, but I don't know if Tampa's a favorite of mine. Even though they're having a great regular season, they were playing so well. But I think it's going to be teams that know how to play through a lot of adversity. So Toronto has had a lot of adversity this year, but I just don't see the consistency. If they can find it playoffs, okay. Washington is a really good team. I think they've learned a lot about themselves a couple of years ago. Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. Now, those two teams really stand out to me because of the seasons they've had. They've had really good seasons, but they've had to go through a lot to get there. Like Philadelphia, they are a tough team, and they are really mentally strong. Same with Pittsburgh. I can't even believe Pittsburgh has that sort of record considering the injuries they've gone through. I'm going to surprise people out there. I really liked Columbus going into the playoffs. Had the league not gone on pause, they were hard to play against. You did not want to play them going into the playoffs. Unfortunately, with the stoppage, that might not be the case. St. Louis, they're wonderful. Same with Colorado. I love Dallas. Dallas is a really tough team to play against. They play the right way. Vegas is a good team. Edmonton, we know they're terrific. Calgary and Winnipeg, to me, could have been really tough teams to play against. Now, this is going to be an interesting first round series because, man, these two teams had really tough seasons and lots of adversity. When I covered the Flames throughout the season, I liked them at times and I didn't like them at times. And I said it, I believe I did an interview with Ryan Pinder on Fan 960 in late January. I said, if Calgary can make the playoffs, I think they're going to be really dangerous because they've gone through all sorts of stuff all season long, and they were finding ways to get through it. And then, as you know, they put themselves in a nice position. Now coming back though with this relaunch, I don't know if that can still carry over. I'm not the biggest fan of Nashville right now. Vancouver I like, and I think in a couple of years they'll be good. But those are my top choices, I think, for right now.
What about these?
I know that's. Well, they're a pretty darn good team, and having some of that offensive talent up front, that's a dangerous team. I know I won't share the player's name, but there was a player that's a really highly respected defenseman in the league, and he said facing Connor McDavid in McDavid's first year, he's the scariest player one-on-one to face. So that tells you the respect that he has around the league, and it tells you, because virtually you never hear that about a first-year player. You might give him his credit that, yeah, he's a great player, but he might not be as dangerous as Patrick Kane or Sidney Crosby or somebody. But this player, and he's a great defender, he said he's the most dangerous player one-on-one.
Do you think there's a wild card in who's going to win based upon how these players have handled the whole COVID crisis, their training, their behaviors, their mental state? Because everybody can go through a whole bunch within themselves and their families, and people have been impacted by this. Will that trickle through to make it a wild card for some of these players, especially the top echelon players who are key to hoist that cup?
Yes, I'm glad we're having this conversation too, Faisal, because I've talked to a number of people because this is an important topic to me about mental health. I've been told, and now I would have to get confirmation from the NHL and the PA, but I've been told this is still a voluntary return to play. So if a player out there, whether it's through existing health issues or family issues and or mental health issues, can you force a player to play when the league returns? And or would it be worth it? What happens if his mental health isn't quite there? He's fearful for his own safety, somebody else's safety. That's real. I'm really curious to see what the league stance is on that, because I think that this pandemic has created so much stress, not only in general society, but amongst pro athletes as well about where do they stand, financially. You still, even though some of the guys are compensated extremely well, you still have to worry about a player's mental health and what they're going through and what they're feeling. Do they feel safe when they return? All these sorts of little considerations that will affect, that could be the wild card about how well an individual player plays and or the team has results.
Like a franchise owner, a business owner has to worry about its employees, either their star employee or the supporting cast around that star employee. And to your knowledge, does the NHL and the franchises have a strategy or methodology to kind of gauge or understand where people are in their mental health and how they can support them?
All teams do. I'm happy to report that. And they have for a number of years now. I can share a little bit something. I think it's a lot of the younger players are more interested or more willing to share their thoughts, feelings about their mental health with the team psychologist and or the group that's helping them. I have been told in the past by some of the older guys in the league that they're a little bit less interested in sharing, wondering if that information is going to be shared negatively with the organization. So my hope is at some point the veterans around the league will understand that it's not a tool being used against you, but I think that could be for a number of people in different occupations as well. Can I truly go to the HR department? Are they going to back me, or does this make me vulnerable? Where do I stand? I think that's a natural thought for some people, but I think in the world of mental health, at least from my standpoint, I hope that people share and feel comfortable sharing, because it sure takes a burden off.
We've got about a couple minutes left, Kelly. I know that mental health is something that you've been really focusing on and making sure people put that as a priority in their life. If you're a business owner today, if you're a GM or an owner of an NHL franchise, what 2 or 3 things should you put in place to make sure the mental health of your employees and your loved ones are taken care of?
First of all, always make sure that the employee has an opportunity to share what they're going through, and that they feel protected. And also, this one's kind of important to me because I think for the professionals out there that are caring for these players and or people in organizations outside the sports world, keep an eye on them, because oftentimes there are signs there, and you can spot a few signs that people are really struggling. Some might be not showing up at work on time, not showing up at all, having excuses for their behaviors. If you're able to have one-on-one interaction, I've always said, look at them, look at their face, look in their eyes, because oftentimes the eyes don't lie. So when you used to look at a person and look in their eyes and they're radiant and they look full of life, now they look troubled and worrisome. So it might be, and I tell people this all the time, in particular if it's a family member, have the conversation like, how are you doing? You feeling okay? Yeah. They may or may not want to share, but in some cases they might. And just stress to them, you don't want to do this alone.
Great points, Kelly. Make sure you as business owners out there are taking care of your employees and the people who are around you. Kelly, thank you so much for taking some time out for Real Talk Live here.
Yeah, thanks, Faisal, for inviting me. This has been awesome.
We've been joined by Kelly Hrudey with Real Talk Live. We're going to have a replay of this. It's going to be out in about a week or so on YouTube. If you want to catch all this great conversation, check us out. Subscribe to us or even follow us on Facebook and on Instagram, and we'll send that link out to you shortly. You've been listening to Faisal Karmali on Real Talk Live.